You wake up feeling great, and by noon, you're snapping at everyone and thinking you're a terrible person. Your moods actually work like thunderstorms. They build up, hit hard, and always pass through. Today, we're talking about the one thing people get wrong about their emotions that keep them stuck in cycles they can break.
You know how us Minnesotans, we like to talk about weather.
A little bit too much.
Just a little bit too much. But you had mentioned something earlier this week, saying that our things that are kind of going on in our brains can kind of be like a weather system.
Yeah. Well,
What's that all about?
one of the things we always like to popular small talk, at least in Minnesota, is always the weather. So you walk up to someone like, oh, you don't know what to say, and
How's the weather?
nice day outside, right? And I always kind of jump on that, just not jump on it, but I always pay attention to it, realizing that this person has no idea what they want to talk about. So we're talking about the weather. But anyway,
It's an empty space filler.
it's a space filler.
It's an uncomfortable space. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got to thinking, our mind's kind of like a weather system, and specifically like our moods are kind of like the weather, and our emotions for that matter too. So you know how some days your mind feels like a storm, kind of dark, loud, or overwhelming perhaps, and other days it feels more like sunny and light and calm and easy to navigate, kind of like
Everything's rosy.
a
going
beach
your
in the
way.
Bahamas,
Right. Oh yeah. Of course.
the turquoise waters
Yep.
lapping at your feet. But what I want to kind of think about is that moods really aren't just random weather. What if they're more about like patterns, systems, and even kind of climate? So I thought it'd be a good way to kind of think about emotion and mood and how they impact us on a daily basis, or even over time, longer than a day.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to kind of think about moods as weather, and then think of our mental health more of as a climate. So we have our moods. A mood on any given day is kind of like the weather forecast for a
Right.
given 24-hour periods of time, whereas our overall mental health is more of a climate. And it kind of stems from the pervasiveness of depression in our society. You know, people are getting more and more depressed. People are getting more and more anxious. And sometimes we confuse having a bad day with depression. So I think it might be a good way to kind of reframe how we talk about emotions, moods, and then our mental health in general.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So let's kind of frame a little bit. The first one is, we talk about weather. We all talk about the weather. And when we talk about weather, what are we referring to? We're referring to what is outside the window at a given time.
Sunny to cloudy, raining, snowing.
There's the one joke is, there's an entire weather channel dedicated to the weather, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the TV. But there's other weather channel that's been around for a lot longer than that, and that's called a window. Given when we think about weather, we think about what is going to impact us on this given day. What is the forecast going to be for today when I'm going kayaking versus tomorrow when I'm going back to work, right?
I suppose if it doesn't have an impact on your day, why would you pay any mind to it?
Right, exactly. Well, you do kind of, you pay attention to the climate, for example, but we think about weather and moods. Those are temporary. They change quickly, and they're sometimes unpredictable.
Right.
That's the way the weather is, especially in Minnesota. Yesterday, I was meeting with some people in the afternoon. It was perfectly sunny and warm out, and all of a sudden, a storm rolls over. So weather can be really temporary, and it can change rather rapidly.
It can be very moody.
Yeah, they always say wait 5 minutes and the weather will change.
Yep.
But our moods are the same way. And I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that our moods are, temporary. They change quickly, and they're sometimes unpredictable. Any encounter with somebody can change our mood from happy and calm to irritated and annoyed. And from that standpoint, they're like the weather. They're temporary, they change quickly, and they're sometimes unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Think about storms as, can kind of be related to anger and anxiety. They flare up randomly. And then just as quick as they flare up, they can kind of go away. You have sunny skies that can be related to like our joy and energy that we feel. And then you look at fog. Like this morning, it was pretty foggy. I'm not sure if you had that experience
yeah.
this morning.
It's cool.
But that can kind of be, parallels with, our confusion and general low motivation that we may have. And all that changes throughout the day. It can all change within the hour, for that matter, too. But we can really relate our moods and our emotional experience in the moment to a weather pattern. Contrasting with that, we look at the climate. So you have Minnesota weather, right? Or you have Florida weather. But you also have the Florida climate, which is much different than the Minnesota climate. So how would you describe the Florida climate?
Hot,
Probably humid.
Yeah. And very humid, and not really, no cold, and definitely a lot of wind and storms.
Sure. So how would you describe Minnesota climate?
Well, winter and road construction.
Oh man!
No one's ever come up with that one before.
No one's ever said that one.
Definitely solidly at least 3 seasons each year. Sometimes we skip. Usually the one that we skip is spring. Sometimes we go go from winter to summer. Sometimes we don't even have a summer, but I would say it's very seasonal. It's very unpredictable.
Yeah, and so what you're describing is you're not describing the daily weather. Like you didn't, when I asked you to describe the climates, you were kind of comparing and contrasting them in your mind. You didn't give me the last 365 specific days of weather patterns, right?
True.
You gave me the larger trends that we can associate with each place.
I also say that Minnesota is pretty extreme.
Minnesota is extreme.
Yeah,
but we were describing Minnesota. You essentially said Minnesota has 4 distinct seasons, except sometimes in the spring when we go right from winter into summer with the heat and whatnot, higher humidity. And then generally speaking, you described Florida as hot, perhaps humid, a bit stormy, particularly during hurricane season. But those are really broad strokes that we use to describe a climate. And the climate is a lot like our mental health patterns, I should say, are a lot like the climate. For example, you look at the larger trends. Does somebody have persistent anxiety? Does somebody have persistent depression? Or is somebody persistently resilient? That's how you can kind of look at, that's kind of the difference between a mood swing that we all experience on a daily basis with the larger mental health patterns that we have as a whole. So just like climate influences the kinds of weather you're likely to get, mental health influences the moods that we cycle through. So if somebody has a mental health problem of depression, for example, their climate, so to speak, is a depressed state. Whereas somebody that has has a resilient mental health pattern that doesn't have depression, you can see that their trend is going to be a lot different than somebody that's chronically depressed. So it's kind of a good contrast to compare, mental health with climates, and then our moods kind of to the daily weather pattern that we experience.
If you were to assign a mental health pattern of Minnesota for this summer, what would you have? What kind of mental health pattern would you say it?
I would say Minnesota had an anger problem this past summer.
Yeah.
It was very hot.
Very hot, but it rained every single day almost.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really weird.
Really stormy. Yeah, it rained a lot.
It was almost like it was almost like Minnesota had some anxiety. I was just really trying to kick.
Well, I'll tell you, the Minnesota River, when I go to St. Peter, it was persistently high all year, and typically we don't see that.
Oh, yeah.
Except in the spring.
Didn't they have to shut it down temporarily in the summer? Or maybe that was still the spring.
It might have been the spring. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I never experienced it being shut down. But
it's pretty common down there. But
yeah. So I kind of want to talk about the science behind this. Neuroscience. There's this neuroscience of mood regulation, which just means what in our brain neurologically regulates our mood. Well, you have neurotransmitters that impact mood, as well as stress hormones. If we talked about stress hormones, right? Mm-hmm. If we have high stress, that then impacts our mood. Then we also have circadian rhythms. Sleep patterns, for example, that also influences mood regulation. So people that don't sleep as well, if you don't get as good of a night of sleep as we typically do, we're going to wake up grumpy and cranky, like typical middle-aged men, right? But that's kind of the science of mood regulation, and a lot of things that impact us on a daily basis can then impact our moods that we have. So we want to think of the psychological research that relates to a state trait, which is a state meaning momentary, versus like a trait that we have as far as our moods and mental health go. So if you think of a state, that's like a momentary state that we're in. So right now, our state is, for the most part, I think, calm and relaxed. That's the state we're currently in.
Yep.
Whereas if we're faced with a lot of deadlines, the state we may be in is high stress.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
A trait is something that has an enduring characteristic. So if you have a anxiety trait, that means that you have a pattern of anxiety that endures over time rather than just a temporary, than just something that's because of a situation that you're reacting to. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's really important, and the reason I bring that up, this difference between momentary states and then enduring traits or enduring characteristics, is that it's very important for us to recognize and be able to distinguish between passing moods and deeper patterns. So again, we look at our daily mood as the weather, and the weather, as you know, passes. Whether you're in Florida, Minnesota, Iowa, California, it's important to recognize the difference between the weather patterns that are our moods and then the deeper patterns that may indicate more climate shifts, such as depression or burnout. Somebody that's depressed isn't going to feel sad one day and then happy, all the other times. That's not depression. If somebody feels bad on a day, that's just maybe you're feeling sad. But if that depressed state persists for an extended period of time, that's when you want to start paying attention to maybe this is more of a trait that is starting to become ingrained that may be impacting my overall mental health. A lot of times, sometimes we forget that as human beings, we're emotional and we're going to have our emotional ups and downs. And there's no cure for normal. And normal for a human being is to have good days and have bad days.
Right.
Hopefully we have more good days than bad days. But nonetheless, our weather patterns the weather pattern of our mood is going to go up and down to some degree.
Right. Sure.
So it's more important to not necessarily get too obsessive over having a bad day here and there, but it's more important to take the bigger picture and look at the overall pattern.
Well, if you can't
health.
kick the bad days, if you just keep on having bad days and you keep on feeling down and there's no real identifiable reason for it, then you might have a little bit something more going on.
That's more like a climate shift you could compare
right,
to, right?
Yeah, right.
What kind of climate is what kind of climate are you noticing?
So a persistent mood can turn into a climate?
It can definitely turn into a pattern, yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Definitely.
So if you have these recurring moods, recurring feelings, and they're not good feelings, and you don't know how to get out of it, talk to somebody.
Right. Correct. Exactly. Yep.
Yep.
So practically, what does this all how can we kind of bring this into more practical application, so to speak? It used to be back in the day growing up, I remember Dad would always get up and listen to the weather on WCCO.
While doing his morning stretches.
And he would always pay attention to that weather, where now we don't really rely on that as much anymore. And meteorologists, while it's a very valuable profession, they've kind of become more of just a personality that presents the weather to us, because we just turn on our phones and look at the weather, right?
Yeah.
But really, it's important that for all of us, it's important that we are able to forecast the weather, because it impacts what we do on a given day. It's a state fair this time of year in Minnesota, at least. I can guarantee you the fair goers were most likely obsessively checking their weather apps to see what kind of weather they were going to be in for.
By the way, I think this has got to be the best week ever for the state fair.
Ever.
Josh, it's been mid 70s and sunny.
True.
And mostly sunny, partly cloudy.
Yeah.
Just perfect.
Yeah.
Every time I haven't gone to the state fair for years, but every time I have gone, oppressively hot. Can hardly think, can hardly move. Like, everyone's sticky, everyone's gross. Like, man, I could probably be out there all day.
Yeah. There's a lot of diehards.
I'm not going out there all day.
Yeah.
I'm not going out there this year at all, but
not too bad.
Did you go?
I didn't go.
You didn't go?
No.
Are you
No,
gonna
I
go?
went to a couple of local fairs. I'm not going to get to the state fair.
You want some Aunt Martha's cookies or whatever they are?
I sure do want Aunt Martha's cookies, but just with my sons in football and whatnot, that's in full swing, and just wouldn't work out.
I know we want to get back to this, but I just got to say one random comment about the state fair.
Okay.
So, as you know, I'm part of the Rotary Club in New Prague, and so we always do like a little trivia, just kind of a fun thing at the beginning of our meeting. And this year, today was about stats for the state fair, and guess how many cookies the 3 or 4 locations.
I think there's 3.
There's 3. Okay, guess how many cookies they bake every 12 minutes.
Every 12 minutes.
Every 12 minutes. Those Sweet Martha's or Aunt Martha's cookies.
10,000.
No. 30,000 cookies every 12 minutes.
How is that possible?
I don't know. But you go buy those little huts, and my gosh, it's an hour-long wait just to get some cookies.
I just wish I would have come up with the idea of selling a simple chocolate
Just
chip
cookies.
cookie to the masses.
Yeah.
They're just cookies.
Well, you can still do it. Just put the cookies on a stick.
True.
Then you're in for the state fair.
True.
So
Yeah.
maybe we gotta do that.
Yeah,
Maybe we
very
should.
true. But anyway, we kind of talked about forecasting. So it's important in the same way we forecast, like checking the weather for storms that may be coming, right? If you're going to the fair, you definitely want to know if there's a storm coming. It's also important to kind of forecast and our moods, meaning learning our triggers. What kind of sets us off? What gets us irritated? What makes us angry? What makes us happy?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can be aware of our triggers, we're better able to prepare for the upcoming weather that is our mood, so to speak. What does preparation look like? It means building routines that can help serve as kind of like, quote, the umbrellas. I'm really taking this analogy way too far. But if we're aware of what our triggers are for being stressed out, being anxious, being angry, we can build our routines around those to kind of set ourselves up to engage in self-care to reduce the frequency of unpleasant emotions.
Sure.
It doesn't mean you're ever going to stop it completely, because again, going through different emotions and moods is part of the human existence. We're not robots. But if we can kind of build healthy self-care, healthy grounding practices around what we know our triggers are, then we're better able to kind of weather the storm, so to speak,
Sure.
of
Okay.
moods that come our way. But where it really gets difficult is where we pay attention to our overall climate. So it's one thing to address our individual moods on a daily basis, but if we don't pay attention to the overall climate that we have in our life, we're never going to get to a place where we feel healthy.
Right.
So if we notice that we're experiencing regular depression or regularly chronically bad moods, then we're looking at more of a pattern, more of a trait pattern like we talked about previously, or an enduring problem that may need to be addressed through things like seeking therapy, perhaps. Lifestyle changes is kind of a big one. We've talked a lot about here about, eating a healthy nutrition and exercise. So lifestyle plays a big piece. Sometimes medication is necessary. Another big one that we're really lacking in our society nowadays is community support. So shaping community support from the standpoint of shaping our systems, or shaping our lives in a way so that the storms that we have to weather don't become destructive, if that makes sense. So it's really important to pay attention to the climate of our lives as well as the daily weather patterns of our mood.
Sure. Right. That makes sense.
That kind of leads into this idea of what common mistakes do we make when we're kind of managing mood and climate, or mood and enduring patterns that our mental health may not be healthy. That's the number one, is mistaking weather for an overall climate problem, meaning mistaking mood for depression, for example. So an example, I feel bad today, therefore I must be broken. Well, as I'm saying that sounds completely illogical. But a lot of times it's very easy for our brains to generalize to something completely inaccurate. Or I'm feeling sad, therefore I am depressed.
Sure.
Those don't necessarily coincide with each other accurately. And so it's really important to be aware that not to mistake a daily mood for something more severe. In the same way, it's just as important for us to not ignore a larger problem because something currently seems fine in our life. So it's important not to ignore the fact that we may be depressed, even though we may be having a good day. If the overall climate of our lives is more depressed days than good days, then that's something we want to look at as well.
So what you're saying is, don't confuse weather for climate, and don't confuse climate for weather. For example,
That was a very unhelpful statement.
well, they're two different things.
You want to try to re-clarify that for people?
Okay, but like if you're like if you have a really down day, you're feeling really sad, or you're just like feeling just like really blue for some reason, someone might say, well, I'm depressed today.
Right.
That's not really, you're not
Exactly.
you're not
That's not
really
accurate.
depressed then. That's your mood for the day.
You're just having a bad day.
If you have a week of feeling bad or sad or down, that's still probably a mood. But then, at what point would you say, maybe this isn't a mood, maybe this isn't the weather, maybe this is the climate that I'm in right now?
Well, let's just talk about it from depression, because we all are pretty much aware of what depression is. It's a chronically state of feeling depressed, right? Feeling down in the dumps,
Just
feeling
can't kick
worthless,
Yep.
feeling unmotivated, fatigued, perhaps loss of appetite, no energy. That's kind of depression. That can all happen to us on any given day. We can all wake up one day, or we all have days that we go through where we don't feel motivated, where we feel fatigued, where we don't feel like we have any worth. If that persists for a long period of time, meaning months on end, then you're looking at more of probably a mental health issue that is probably depression. Whereas if you have a couple days like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're suddenly depressed now. I would encourage, if that is the case, more often than not, we can kind of look at what's going on in the person's life at the time, and we can kind of identify what's contributing to the poor mood. For example, if somebody has a stressful week at work, has been working really late, is having poor sleep, is anxious about deadlines, well, it's not surprising that you're not going to be in the greatest mood ever.
Right.
But once that storm passes, so to speak, typically the mood will lift. Now, if the stress passes, the deadlines pass, and you're still persistently depressed over time, even though everything else is relatively good, then you may be looking at more of a depression type of situation.
So, I know this wouldn't apply to all circumstances of depression, but sometimes I guess your first indicator would be like, I don't really have any reason to be depressed.
Yeah.
But I still feel depressed, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
It could be also just a chemical thing too, where
right, exactly.
Yep. I would say I wouldn't say me and I don't know. Maybe you would know. Like, is it with depression specifically? Is it almost always a chemical imbalance in the brain, or is it can it be mostly other things, or combo, or?
I like to describe depression that the way I portray it to people is there's kind of two kinds of depression. There's situational depression. And then I call it organic depression. So the first one is situational depression is circumstances in life are contributing to your depression. And if those situations in life can be resolved, hopefully your depression will then most of the time be resolved as well. But we all when people have situational depression, they have so many situations in life that are contributing to their poor mood that it just becomes this chronic issue over time. And once we can resolve those things, the depression then resolves itself.
Sure.
I call it more organic depression as, like you had mentioned, a chemical imbalance in the brain. There's a lot of research that shows true clinical depression is immune to situations in the environment and is more related to a chemical imbalance that happens in our brain that contributes to the poor mood, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's kind of that's an easier way to kind of explain it, that I use it to explain it to people.
Yeah.
So to kind of hopefully help people think about it a little more. Kind of an analogy for mood is a runner training in all conditions. So it's important that even though we have a bad mood on a given day, that we continue moving forward. We don't just mail it all in, right? For example, if someone wants to run in a half marathon or a marathon, our brother, for example, is training for a half marathon right now. I'm not sure if you knew that or not.
Jesse?
Jesse is, yep.
Crazy guy.
But as part of that, he has to continue moving forward regardless of the rain or heat. He had to, if he wanted to have a goal, if he wanted to reach his goal of running the half marathon this fall, he had to run in the rain and the heat and the humidity that's been a part of our Minnesota summer this past summer. He had to continue persisting forward despite the conditions that were outside. And it's the same thing in our lives. If we have a difficult mood, a bad mood on a given day, it's really important that we set up systems in our lives that allow us to continue moving forward despite the fact that we're feeling down. Another way to look at it is sometimes there's seasonal shifts for different life phases, and it's important to pay attention to that. A lot of families right now have kids going off to college. That creates a stress on the family that can then impact the overall mood or weather pattern that we have in our life. We know people right now that are going through new parenthood in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
That creates a seasonal shift, and that also impacts mood, right? Our mood's not going to stay the same, or our stress levels aren't going to stay the same when we're going through parenthood transition. Retirement's another one. Retirement is a seasonal shift in life that can impact mood. Hopefully for a lot of people, shifting into retirement is a good thing.
Right.
But it can also force people to reckon with, well, what's my purpose now?
Right.
Do I still have worth? Do I still have value? And that can in turn impact our mood and maybe our overall mental health as well.
Work is not everything, people. I mean, it's the thing that you spend probably the majority of your waking hours doing during your adult life, but it's not the only thing. And that's finding that work-life balance is important. Although, some people can definitely take it too far the other way too.
Yep. So it comes to practical takeaways for listeners. Number one, check your radar daily. So check in with yourself, so to speak. What's your mood on a given day? What is it looking like for you on a given day? Things like mindfulness or journaling we've talked about, just to kind of note the day's weather. And sometimes there's really no rime or reason for why we wake up in a good mood or a bad mood. Sometimes it just is. And being able just to acknowledge the state that we're in is really important to do. So it's important to check that weather daily. The other thing I would add is it's important to invest in climate health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So long-term practices such as ensuring good sleep patterns, good sleep hygiene, some people like to call it, incorporating movement into your daily routine, maintaining good nutrition, that's a really important one. The research has found that as the American diet has gotten less and less healthy, the number of mental health issues have also increased with it. That's a very loose correlation, but there's probably some kind of connection there. So nutrition is very important.
Yeah.
And then relationships. If we aren't surrounding ourselves with healthy relationships, our mental health isn't going to be what it can be. So it's really important to have people in our corner.
So just to back up to the nutrition thing, another state fair fact, trivia.
Okay.
How many pounds of cheese curds are sold at the state fair every year?
Pounds of cheese curds. So one order of cheese curds is probably what, a half pound?
I don't know, maybe. It's probably.
Maybe a quarter pound.
Maybe the buckets are maybe the buckets are close to a pound.
10,000 pounds.
Nope.
Seems low.
That's a little low. That's way.
I'm sure you're going to tell me, John.
100,000 pounds of cheese curds are sold and eaten at the state fair every year.
I would love to know how many calories are sold at the fair.
Oh.
Calories.
Hundreds of billions. Hundreds of billions. And the sweet corn stand?
Yeah.
It's upwards of like 30,000 an hour, I believe, that are sold. No, 30,000 a day, I believe.
Wow.
It's a lot of corn.
Yeah.
And butter.
A lot of good stuff, though.
Yeah.
I read a Garfield comic strip. This was years ago, like decades ago, and it always stuck with me because I thought it was hilarious. It was Garfield and John Arbuckle sitting there eating their food, and they had just finished, and they were all bloated after they just gorge themselves with food, and John Arbuckle says, "Man, what a great meal." And then Garfield says, "Oh, it sure was." And then John says, "It's too bad. It's too bad there's no measure there's no measure for how good food tastes." And Garfield says, "Ah, but there is. It's called the calorie."
In that case, yeah, Oreos are anything super high calorie,
That's right.
Super calorie dense. That's right. That's true. We have that sugar addiction. So
yeah, we sure do. Okay, so check your radar daily. Note where you're at. It just and acknowledge where your internal weather is at on a given day. Invest in your own climate health. That means just long-term practices to maintain your mental health. The challenge with maintaining mental health is it's a proactive process, and we are in a society that is constantly pursuing comfort. And so those two ideas are opposed to each other. So in order for us to have good mental health, we have to be proactive and do the hard things to set ourselves up for it. But that is in direct opposition to this idea of this comfort culture that we have, where we just don't really want to do anything,
right,
if we can help it.
And not doing anything doesn't feel comfortable either.
Right.
When it comes right down to it, it's not comfortable.
Yep. Next one is check the radar daily, invest in your own climate health, your long-term practices, and then don't judge storms as failures. So there's going to be storms in life, whether they're made by you or made by somebody else or made by a different situation. They are a part of our lives. They're natural and will pass. And I think where we kind of trip ourselves up, at least is what I do, is you go into each day anticipating that there won't be any storms, or there won't be any bumps in the road, or there won't be any barriers. And I think when we do that, we set ourselves up for failure, because we're going to be surprised and disappointed and angry if we hit a bump in the road or a barrier.
Sure.
That's not to say that we plan for misery, but it just means that, we want life to go well, but we also acknowledge that life isn't always going to go the way we want it to.
Right. Good point.
And when we hit those storms or hit those difficult forks in the road, know that they will pass. Give yourself a moment to get through it. It's going to pass. Some will pass, take longer to pass than others, but most of the time, difficult storms in our lives, they do pass. And then this is probably most important, and that is resilience does not mean that there's no storms in your life. You meet people that are resilient, that always have that most of the time have a positive attitude, or upbeat, calm, and can face life. It's not that they don't have storms in their life. It's just that they've learned how to navigate them effectively for themselves. So believe it or not, people that are perpetually resilient, they don't have it all together. They've just learned how to weather the storms and navigate through them.
They know they come to learn and accept, and in some ways welcome the storms, because they know it's coming anyways. They don't know when, but they know that most likely they're going to be able to get through it just fine.
Yeah. Yep.
Obviously, if you're diagnosed with like a terminal illness or something like that, that's a climate change. That's a massive storm. But some people, I've known many people who have been given terminal diagnoses, and they made a climate change to the point where they live their best life.
Yeah.
It's really, instead of they could have been miserable and sad.
Well, they could have folded.
They could have completely folded, but they chose hey, I'm going through this anyways. Might as well make the most out of it.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you have any control over what your mood is. You don't really have a control. You don't have control.
I'm sure they have very bad days too.
You don't have control over the mood or what you feel, but what you do have control over is how you respond to that.
Right.
That is the one thing we have control over, and resilient people have developed the skill of being able to respond to their mood in a way that is healthy. And you'll notice I mentioned skill. It's not a natural ability that some people have and some people don't. It's a skill that we choose to practice and exercise. Yeah. And the more we do it, the better we get at it.
It's like breaking out the umbrella and putting on the rain boots and choosing to dance in the rain instead of put the newspaper over your head and get all soaked.
Or you could just not bring the umbrella like I do and just determine that it's not going to rain.
That's right. Just walk between the water drops.
Dodge the water drops. Yep. So kind of closing it out for everybody. You can't control the weather, but you can prepare for it. And while you can't change your climate or your mental health overnight, you can influence it over time by taking healthy steps in a positive direction. And then it's important to keep in mind that the storms will pass, but the climate is what sustains you. So just kind of know that if we can take proactive opportunities to strengthen our mental health, to build healthy relationships with others, and to build healthy systems that allow us to remain mentally healthy over time, that's what will sustain us through the storms that we have in life.
Yeah.
And I would just call people to notice their mental weather this week and consider what it reveals about their overall climate.
Ah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
We're all going to be mini meteorologists by the time we're done processing this episode.
Absolutely. That was some good stuff. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Non-Static Podcast. If you want to keep the conversation going, sign up for the Non-Static newsletter at nonstatic.org. And if you or someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, you can connect with us anytime at Inspire Services at inspireservicesllc.com. Take care, keep moving forward, and as always, enjoy the journey.